Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rick and Terry, for your invitation. I guess I should disclose I'm not a researcher. I'm not a lawyer. I've worked in HR for about 10 years, and currently I work for a not-for-profit. We have 300 employees in BC and Alberta. And I've been a bit of an observer to the development of this workplace questions in the Sex Now survey. So when Terry sent me his paper and asked me from my perspective from an HR view, I started immediately to think of kind of the day-to-day actions at work. So my interactions when I'm counseling a manager or a supervisor on how to handle a situation with an employee and what the implications would be for the mass of people who aren't out at work. But then I started to think about what's the Canadian context and what are the situations in Canada that exist because of legislation or the lack of legislation. So they asked me to speak for a few moments kind of on my point of view on the paper and the data that you've just seen. So I want to quickly talk about the Canadian context, a little bit about the legislation that exists and the support that is or isn't there. I'll talk a little bit about how kind of I see one of the critical moments in the workplace and how that plays out when people aren't out at work. I've been thinking a lot about young gay men, and particularly yesterday with Keith and the investigators telling us that, and even Terry this morning, young gay men are coming out earlier, and it's conceivable they're coming out before they've even had their first job. How are we preparing them? So that's been on my mind, and I'll talk for a moment, and then that'll be a wrap. So let's just jump right in. Since 2009, every province has included in their provincial Human Rights Act sexual orientation. So it's a protected class, and the Northwest Territories actually includes gender identity, and it's the only one that does. Now, depending on the province that you're in, if you are facing discrimination as a lesbian, gay, bisexual, or a trans folks, you might have good support or you might not. So some human rights tribunals will actually give you a person to walk you through the process, an advocate, and then others don't. So that's kind of the status of human rights. And of course, if you work for a federally regulated organization, so airline, railway, bank, you fall under the Canadian Human Rights Act. Now, it's shocking, but only 3 of our provinces actually have specific legislation dealing with harassment and bullying at work, and it's these 3 here. The Ontario people might have heard Bill 168, so that was probably one of the most comprehensive, because they actually amended the Occupational Health and Safety Code in the province of BC, and, Ontario. And it goes a bit further. They have a duty to protect employees from potential violence, and they've actually included domestic violence in their act. But you got to wonder what the implications are for people who aren't out at work, right? Now, Terry was asking me, what's the support available if you're a person who's been discriminated at work because of your sexual orientation? What recourse do you have? Well, what's really great is in BC, for instance, we recently made post-traumatic stress compensable. So I don't know if anybody here has ever had to open a WorkSafe claim or a workers' compensation claim. It's not easy. They don't really want to pay, and you don't make much money when you're on WorkSafe. But also, they have said that it's not compensable if it's the result of discipline or termination. So you can imagine, where do most of this come up, right? So we're being disciplined or we're being fired at work as a result of discrimination, and those two aren't compensable. So you wouldn't get any support there. And the courts. So I'll talk about 2 really interesting court cases quickly, because really it's recently been established, so since 2010, that if you are harassed or bullied at work and you're forced to quit, that it is considered constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal means you're in a work situation where you can no longer tolerate it. So you've either had your work conditions changed or there's a number of issues. So this one was particularly concerning. He worked there for 17 years. And in 2006, he ended up going on stress leave from work. He had done everything right. He reported that 4 people harassing him at work. His supervisor wouldn't conduct an investigation. He contacted head office and said, listen, I'll come in and talk to you because nobody's listening to me here. They wouldn't meet with him. So he goes on sick leave and comes back briefly. the people at head office decided they were going to do an investigation. So what they do is they spoke to the supervisor, and the supervisor said, well, don't worry, he's got family troubles at home, he's depressed, so that's why he's feeling like these guys are picking on him. So anyway, he ended up quitting and sued Kraft, got a year's salary. So, not a lot, for somebody that's been there 17 years. 2 years really is kind of the maximum settlement up to this point, and it was really exceptional. So this guy worked there for 17 years, was treated so horribly, but the courts did say, if you are suffering from harassment to this level and your employer doesn't react, then we do agree and we acknowledge that, you don't need to stay. So this one is just from last month. And this one's horrible. This person, Meredith Boucher, worked for Walmart for 10 years. She was on the fast track to get promoted. She'd been working at a bunch of different stores. All of a sudden, she gets a new assistant manager, and this behavior starts. So she did the same thing. She followed all the right paths. She spoke to his supervisor, spoke to people in head office, actually in Canada. No resolution. So she quit. And she sued. This one's unbelievable, $1.4 million. So in the last 2 years, we've had 2 really good court cases. So is this perhaps where it's going to go for Harassment and Discrimination Canada? I don't know. I don't know if anybody here has ever sued their employer. But if to get kind of the basic settlement. So, your employer terminates you, your lawyer sends a letter, we send a letter back, they send a letter to us. Probably that process is going to cost the employee $5,000. So, and if you imagine the maximum kind of calculation for a termination is about 1 month per year of service. So, 5,000. So, are the courts really a remedy for harassment and discrimination at work? Now, I also just wanted to say quickly about the Occupational Health and Safety Code. In Canada, every employee has 3 rights. You have the right to know what hazards exist to the work you're doing. You have the right to participate in your workplace health and safety, and you have the right to refuse unsafe work. And those are very serious, and they're kind of universal in Canada. In Ontario, they also said that you have the right to refuse unsafe work if you're being bullied or harassed. And that's the only place it exists, and I think that's a really amazing development. So hopefully we'll see that across Canada. So in Canada, it's pretty well established that unless you're going to terminate somebody without cause, so meaning you're going to just pay them a lump sum to go away and to not sue you, you need to do some kind of progressive discipline. So you need to follow a process and then terminate them for cause once you have kind of your case built up. And through that process, the courts have established that you need to ask the employee their side of the story. And if you don't and you get to court, it's not a good thing. So, we coach our managers, and, can't tell you how many times a day I say it. Is there anything else I need to know? We're proceeding down this discipline conversation. And, when I was thinking about Terry's presentation, how many times are employees out there asked, is there anything else I need to know? And they bite their lip. And they'd like to disclose that, maybe they've been late, for weeks because their partner is at home ill, but they have never disclosed that they've had a partner. So now this person could potentially, obviously this is very low, level individual instances, but I think this is really where it happens, right? This is where the discrimination happens, and this is where, the nuance, it kind of gets injected into this, because, we can legislate and we can have all the laws we want, but how do we transfer that into kind of positive work environments for gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans folks? So, I was thinking I wanted to have a picture of a Speedo. I don't say dick at work, so I kind of probably have one of the most boring presentations maybe for you guys. But, I was thinking about Matthew Mitchum. He's won the gold medal, and he finds it hard to be himself. So, these young gay guys that are going out to get their first job, there's a big study that was just recently completed in the United States that showed discrimination based on resumes. So they study group sent out all these resumes with same resumes, different identifying information, and it was basically discrimination was taking place on race. So, is that going to happen for young gay guys? Do they have the right resumes so that they're not going to be discriminated against? What do they need to know about potential employers? I remember once doing a seminar with a manager, and they didn't know that there's questions that are illegal to ask in Canada. Do these young gay guys know that these are illegal questions? Is this potentially a red flag that maybe I don't want to work for this company? And then what do you do once you get your job? How do they navigate that decision to come out? Who's mentoring them? What resources can they potentially have to make sure that they aren't kind of in Terry's tables and reports? So that's just a thought. I don't have any answers, but it's been on my mind, and it came out even stronger in the last couple of days, and I thought I would just throw it out there for you. So, one of the things that's really interesting in Canada, the Mental Health Commission of Canada is actually a Health Canada funded organization. Over the last 5 years, they have developed a strategy, and they launched it in June. It's got 6 key goals and 106 or 109 recommendations. And one of the things they say is that the workplace has a role to play in the mental health of Canadians. And can you imagine 10 years ago that headline wouldn't exist? People wouldn't be saying that. So, I've been thinking as I was trying to kind of wrap up my remarks, how can we leverage this experience? How can we get to the point where we're saying that there's a national strategy on, gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans folks in the workplace, and that the workplaces have a responsibility or a role to play in this? So I guess in conclusion, I kind of been all over the place thinking about this, but I firmly believe that, the problem isn't that, people aren't deciding to come out. The problem to me is that there's no financial impetus, there's no legal or legislative impetus to make companies good places to work for us. Yeah, the last point there, what does a good job look like? I don't know. What does the ideal workplace look like? Is this, commission on mental health perhaps something we can leverage? But that's my thoughts on the workplace.